Okay, so this is going to be our 3D lecture part 2. This is going to be pretty straightforward and focused. I'm going to touch on a few things that people brought up to me, some stuff that Pete was talking about in terms of like how to animate the camera, some text stuff that I was going over with Cody earlier tonight, just to show you guys how to kind of utilize 3D to do some additional stylizing of your work. So let's start. I'm going to start fresh. If you guys want to follow along, you're welcome to. If you just want to watch and kind of see how this stuff works, that's fine too. You don't necessarily have to follow along with me. So I'm just going to start fresh with a new composition. I'm going to do 1920 by 1080. I'm going to make it like 10 seconds long. And I'm just going to play with a couple things. So first thing I'm going to start doing is I'm going to create some kind of faux 3D text inside of After Effects, and we're gonna stylize this text a little bit. We're gonna give it some texture, we're gonna give it some bevel, we're gonna give it some depth, we're gonna light it, we're gonna rotate around it a little bit, so you guys can kind of see how you can trick After Effects into making some extruded 3D text for you. So let's just start with I don't know, something cool. Let's just start with the word Tron. How about that? Since I was just looking at Tron. So we've got the word Tron, and we want to like we want to make this look interesting. So I was just looking at Tron over here, and it might even have some text on it somewhere where I can look at kind of like what the stuff looks like. But this is your kind of like, let's see if I can find a decent frame here to pull up. This is kind of cool. So this is your kind of like Tron, everything's surrounded by light kind of a look, kind of looks cool. So I'm going to build a kind of a piece of 3D text that we can play with a little bit and light, and it'll actually take on some reflections and things like that and look interesting. So I've got the word Tron. I'm just going to make a really simple backdrop for this too, just so we have this sitting on something, so it's not just sitting by itself. So I'm going to make a new solid. I'm going to call this ramp, because I'm going to make a little gradient ramp. We're going to throw it down behind our text, and then we're going to use the effect ramp, gradient ramp. We're going to drop that on the background, and I'm just going to pick a couple colors from the Tron show over here. Let's see if I can pick a color from my... Sorry about that, y'all. So I'll just pick a couple colors close to it. So I'm going to pick like a kind of like a really, really dark, kind of like turquoisey color. There we go. For one, and then I'm going to pick kind of something similar in ilk, but a little brighter. Make this one a little darker yet. Not quite as turquoise as I'd like it to be. There we go. Same thing with this one. We're just going to make it a little more blue. Alright, so now we got a nice background going on. I'm going to stretch my ramp out a little bit so that it's a little flatter. Alright, so now we've got this text, and we want to kind of design it and give it a Tron-like look. So let's just start with the basics of the text. So let's go into the character. I'm going to give this a stroke color. So we're going to turn the stroke on, and we're going to give it a nice bright kind of turquoise color. And then I'm going to make the text itself black. And then we need to go in here and we need to make the stroke have some depth to it. So right away that kind of gives us a look on the text. I'm going to go ahead and texture this as well. So I'm going to find just a quick texture online here. Let's just find some scratched metal glass. I'm just typing in scratched glass texture in a Google search real quick, and it's going to give us a bunch of interesting textures. We'll try to find something that doesn't have words all over it. Those have words all over them. Hey, that kind of has words on it too. Hey, that'll work. Alright, so I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to say open image in new tab. and then we can grab this texture. So I'm going to grab this texture. I'm going to just put it on the desktop in a new folder. Week 5 underscore whatever 3D create. Alright, so we got our texture in there. I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to bring that into the project. There we go, bring that in. Alright, so we've got this dark texture, and then what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to take this texture, throw it over the top, and then I'm going to matte this. So we've kind of done this before, and I think what I might do is I'm going to duplicate my Tron text, and for this text I'm just going to make it white. So it's the same text. I'm going to shut the stroke off. I don't need the stroke. I'm going to just use white text. So if I shut off that layer, I've just got a layer of white text. And then I'm going to take this Tron steel thing and I'm going to matte this. So I'm going to say alpha matte inverted. Did that work? I think that worked. So this. And it did not. So let's see. Interesting. Okay, there we go. So now I just have this nice chunk of textured Tron text. And if I unsolo this, you can see that it kind of sits over the black. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play around a little bit with my blending modes. So I'm going to start with some softer colors, and I'm going to take my black text and I'm going to make it gray, just a little bit gray, so that that texture will start to show up on the text back there. And I'm going to try a few different blending modes to just see what, if I could hit the right button, that would help. See what things kind of look like. And I'm also going to come in here and I'm going to add levels to my texture so that I can kind of control how bright and dark it is. So we're going to like push the levels a little bit so we can make that texture show up a little bit better. Let's try screen. Alright, let's try backing that off with some opacity. We're starting to get there a little bit. Bring in this. Really. That's better. Okay, so one of the other things that I'm going to do here is I'm going to work in 16-bit mode. So one of the things that right now you can see we're in 8-bit mode. So if I scroll over this in the project window, you can go into project settings and you can change how many bits per channel that your project is working in. Note that if you do this, your render times are going to go up because everything's basically double the amount of bits. And so you're working in a lot broader color space, and you get a lot better like layering effects, and blending modes and things like that are going to look a lot cleaner when you use 16 bits per channel. So I'm going to go 16 bits per channel. You can see the texture showing up pretty nicely now. I'm going to kind of try to tweak this a little bit more and see if I can't get this to just pop real nice. That's looking pretty okay. So now we've got this nice this nice text set up. I'm going to go back into the layer underneath my Tron 2 with the glowy outside on it, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this just the outer layer. So like if I solo this, we're just seeing the outside, the stroked part of this layer, and I'm going to thin this out a little bit, and we're going to build up a nice blur around this text so that it pops really nicely. So I'm going to duplicate this, and this is going to be called Tron Text Outer Glow. Alright, and then the one underneath that I'm going to set back to what I had originally with the black text. I should have just duplicated that earlier, but that's okay. Alright, so I'm going to take this glow, and I'm going to duplicate this a couple times. So we talked about this when we did particles, layering things up, right? So I'm going to take this Tron Outer Glow text, and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to add some blur effects to it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do just a fast box blur is fine for this stuff. And I'm just going to set the blur radius out a little bit, 8 pixels. I'm going to duplicate that.
Oh wow, it's starting to look like it.
Yeah, it's starting to look like it. Imagine that. I'm going to just take this, I'm going to duplicate this several times and just kind of make this glow a little bit more on each subsequent overlay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-compose these. So I'm going to pre-compose these all together, right, so we've got our outer glow. It's pre-composed. So one of the things that I had talked about earlier too is that, you know, if you take a bunch of 3D layers and you pre-compose them, you need to use this little switch right here, which is this little star switch, which is continuously rasterizing. So for layer comps, it collapses transformations, which basically means it looks at the subcomp for any of its directions. So if you subcomp a bunch of stuff that's in 3D, you need to click that little button in order for it to show up in 3D in your main composition. All right, so we have our Tron text is kind of laid out now. It's looking kind of cool. It's got some glow going on it, which is good. I'm going to go back over here and I'm actually going to work this glow just a little bit more. We're going to play with some of the blending modes here, so it starts to overlay a little bit better. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to my comp here, and I'm also going to do this with the main composition. So I'm going to set this mode to add. And there, now we've got a nice, bright, glowy look on our text, which is really nice. All right, so moving forward. All right, so now let's say I wanted to take this text and I wanted to actually make this look like it had a little bit of 3D depth to it, right? All right, so I have a few things here that I'm going to do. I'm going to pre-compose this this texture as well. Texture, and I am going to then pre-compose all of the text together. So right now, if I like solo any one of these layers, you can see that I've got kind of individual things sitting on individual layers. So I've got like my black text with a little bit of the glow on it, or a little bit of the glow on the outside, and then I've got the glow itself, and then I've got the texture over that. So I want all these things to kind of live in the same world together. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a couple little changes here. So I'm going to go back into the character. I'm actually going to make this turquoise color a little brighter on the actual text, so it kind of has a hotter core to it. That looks pretty nice. All right. So then what I'm going to do to kind of make this look more 3D is I'm going to pre-compose all these layers together. Pre-compose Tron Text. Click OK. All right. So we got all the layers are pre-composed over each other, and now what I'm going to do to make this, give this a little bit more depth and three-dimensionality, is I'm going to take and I'm going to duplicate this like 10 times. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we can see we've got a bunch of those layers. They're all working with each other. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position them in Z-space a little bit so that they take on some depth from the side. So if we see them from the side, we might actually be able to make out that these things have some depth to them. So I'm going to click on all the layers but the first one. So we'll let the first one be the one in the front. So I'm going to push P, and I'm going to make all these layers 3D. I better do that first. Make all these layers 3D. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go one by one, and this is kind of the slow way to do this. I'm going to hit P. I'm going to go one by one, and I'm just going to move them back 10 pixels at a time. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 100. So there we go. We've got all these layers of text now set back in 3D space, and you can kind of see that you can see the edges over here, right? So you can see that this it looks like it's got some depth to it now. And what's going to be really cool, so this is the instance that I was telling you, if you take a bunch of 3D layers and you pre-compose them together, and you need them to work properly in your main comp, you need to click that little star button, the continuously rasterize button. So I'm going to take all these Tron layers and I'm going to pre-compose these, and we're going to call this Tron 3D Text.
Are you recording this?
Yes. Okay, so now the Tron 3D Text is all set up, and I'm going to click my continuously raster button, and I'm going to pull a camera in here. So I'm bringing in a camera 1, I'm going to click OK, and you can see that if I move around this, it gets all funky as shit. Alright, that's fun. Okay, I'm going to back up a couple steps and see if I still have that problem here. Let's go new, camera. I think the continuously raster thing was... Wow, that's awesome. So I have a camera. Let's go. Custom view one. Oh, I know what I was doing. Okay, so I was creating a single node camera. That's my bad. Alright, so that should all work. So I'm going to pre-compose those one more time. Tron Text 3D. Click OK. We're going to continuously raster that. And if I go to my active camera, and I actually make the right kind of camera this time. So I was working on a one node camera, which is why it was moving around all funky. So I'm going to go ahead and work on a two node camera and click OK. And now if I rotate this around, you can see that this has a really kind of cool three-dimensional look to it. And you can push it relatively far in terms of how far around the sides you can get. And in actuality, because it's Tron, this could actually really work really well, right? Go ahead.
Kind of like it kind of looked like a bunch of duplicated of the font flatly, and
yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Oh, that's
it doesn't
exactly.
actually. It's not an actual extrusion. So if you worked in 3D programs,
Yeah.
and you extrude text, it actually creates sides and stuff on the text. Well,
Yep.
this is 2.5D. We can't extrude. We can extrude text in After Effects, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But working generally in the classic 3D world is nice because a lot of the things that when you're working in the Cinema 4D 3D version, you can extrude text, but you lose a whole lot of options like blending modes, track mats, things like that can be really helpful. So you can see we've got this kind of cool text. What will make this look even cooler is if we start using some of our camera effects on it, right? So if I cruise in here nice and close on my Tron stuff and kind of rotate this camera around a little bit, look at it from the side. Let's start playing with depth of field a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my camera options. I'm going to turn depth of field on. I'm going to increase my aperture a bunch so that I'm going to start getting some really interesting looks. And then maybe we throw on an octagon in terms of the iris, and it starts to take on a very interesting look, and we can start playing with things like focus distance. If you really want to make this look interesting, we can crank the aperture up even higher, so it's really going to blow stuff out that's in the foreground, and then you get this really nice sense of depth of field here, which is going to help make this look really interesting. Alright, so we've got kind of our cameras kind of set up. So now let's say we want to start animating our camera a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and turn this into draft 3D mode just so that it's not trying to process the depth of field while we're doing this. You can see that at full resolution with all the duplicates and all the glows and all the blending modes and all that stuff that I've already built into this, it's still kind of moving pretty chunky at full resolution when I move around this text. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and set this to half, so we're going to be working in half resolution. We have no depth of field on because we're working in draft 3D. But one thing that you can do to kind of help you with your camera animation, and I do this all the time, and I think I told you about this last week, there is a plugin called SureTarget on Video Copilot that is basically a camera moving utility. And what it does is it allows you to make your camera fly to certain objects in your scene and orient itself to those objects, which is really handy. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in 2019, but if you have older versions at home, like 2018, you can install it and use it, and it works pretty well. I would highly recommend looking at the tutorial, but I'm going to show you kind of a way that you can help animate your camera and compartmentalize some animation properties so that it can be a little bit easier to work with. So right now we have the camera. I'm going to go ahead and just reset my camera transformation so it's set back to 0, and I'm going to create a null object. So new null object, and I'm going to call this camera controller. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to link my camera to the camera controller. So I'm not going to animate the camera proper, I'm going to animate the null, right? So whatever I do with the null, it's going to happen to the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the pick whip, and I'm just going to parent the camera to the camera controller. And now what's going to happen is if I go in and I look at this null, say I'm just going to open up all these properties real quick. I also have to put this null in 3D space in order for this to work. So you got to make sure your null's in 3D. You can see that I can rotate the camera using rotation, left, right, on all the different axes. So it is rotating on all these different axes, and I'm just controlling that with the null itself. I can position the camera with the null object as well. So I can make the camera fly around it, I can make the camera rotate. I can do all kinds of stuff like that with the null object. And the reason that I'm doing this is because it helps separate the animation controls from the camera, which can be really helpful. If you guys have played around with camera animation at all, yeah, you've got to animate both the point of interest and the position in order to get it to kind of go and look where you want it to go. So the null object right now is basically the point of interest, and it is also controlling the position of the camera. Go ahead.
With the null, can you actually pan left and right now instead of just turning the camera?
Yep, so you can take and you can just position the camera left and right really easily. So basically what this does is you've basically taken the point of interest of the camera and turned it into the null object. Because the null object is sitting at the same place that the point of interest of the camera would be sitting at. So if I look at this and I kind of rotate around this a little bit, you can see that that null is in the same place as the point of interest of the camera itself. So if I click on the camera, you can see they're in the same exact position. The nice thing is you can now you have two modes of operation in terms of how you can control the camera. You can control it with the null, and you can control it with the camera itself. So if you wanted the null to do one thing and the camera to do another thing, you can add two layers of animation to this, which is really nice. So this is kind of like a poor man's video copilot sure target setup, but what that does for you is it just makes things a little easier. So like, let's say I want to fly out of the O and then turn the camera on its side one way and then turn and rotate the camera around the other way and then have it fly out and settle on the text, right? So let me set up that animation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to fly my camera to where I want it to start, and like I said, I want it to kind of fly through the O. So I'm going to have it fly through the O. I'm going to kind of set this up, and I'm just using the position controls to kind of do this. I'm going to set a position point right there. And then I want this to be pretty quick too, so I'm going to have it fly out in like 12 frames, so it's going to go fast. So it's going to fly out, and then right about there, I want it to start rotating to the left and to the right. So now I can go into the rotation, and I can start controlling the left, right, up, down rotation. And I want it to actually rotate up like this. Like this is how I want it to rotate exactly. Ooh, you know what we can do? We can do kind of a cool Hitchcocky thing here. Let's do that. All right, so the camera comes out. I'm going to actually bring the camera like, I'm going to look at two views here for a second so I can see kind of where things are at. And I'm going to zoom this out, punch this in. Let's go custom view so I can see where the hell things are at. All right, so what I want to do is I want the camera to kind of rotate around the O, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the camera all the way out to where that null object is kind of sitting right in the O, and I'm locating it here on this screen. So I just kind of want it to sit right in the center of the O. So I'm going to go like right about there. All right, so now my point of interest is there. Let's control the zoom as well. So we're going to do like a Hitchcock effect on this thing. So I'm going to go, oops, it's not in material options on my null object. So this is controlled by the camera itself. So you want to make sure you're controlling this stuff here. All right, so I'm going to control the zoom. So I'm setting a keyframe for the zoom where it is now, and I'm going to move that back to 0 frames where it starts, right? So that it starts right where I want it to start. But then I want it to kind of zoom in so that we're kind of seeing the O up close, right? So this is kind of what we get, right? And then what I'm going to do is now I can rotate the camera around on this x-axis. Okay, rotating the camera around using the controller, not the camera itself. So I'm going to rotate this around, and you can see we've got this really kind of like compressed space look going on, which is pretty cool. And we've got to set keyframes for this too. So I'm going to go ahead and set keyframes and back up a little bit. This is set to 0. And then now we can see we've got this look where it just rotates from one direction So we've got this kind of zooms out and then rotates.
Whoa,
And then
wait.
let's play around a little bit with the how we want this to move. So this could be kind of cool. So I'm going to set a Z rotation here too for another 12 frames. So I'm going to have it rotate around to the other side, like so. But I'm also going to have it rotate on the Z axis. And then let's play with our zoom here too. So I'm going to hit U to show me my zoom. So I'm going to have it zoom out here when it rotates around the other side. Get kind of a wide shot of it. And then I think the other thing that I want to do here is I want to build some in-betweens. So I'm going to copy some of these keyframes and I'm going to paste them so that we get some in-betweens going on here, so that the camera's kind of staying in one place for a beat before it moves over to the other side. But the zoom is actually kind of cool. Okay, I'm going to scoot these over just a little bit so there's some time as this kind of flies across the screen.
It looks like it's all over the place.
Yep, well we're building it bit by bit here. So I'm trying to keep the motion as simple as possible without doing too many keyframes. Then we can go in and we can complicate it a little bit. So like let's say from here to 3 seconds we wanted this to do something else, like we wanted it to rotate in an interesting way. Yeah, that's what I want right there. So I'm playing with the orientation here. So I'm going to animate the orientation, and I want it to do kind of like I want it to rotate around this direction. And then we'll bring it back to 1. So I want this to kind of go back to its original position. So I'm going to set some keyframes here, key, and then we're going to set these all back to 0. And we're going to kind of have our final position here too. So let's go like so. Set position, keyframe, so that I can center this up at the end. So I'm basically just going to center this in the frame, kind of like so. So we've got this kind of crazy looking animation right here with all these wonky camera looks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of do a blanket easy ease on all this stuff, and we're just going to see what happens. And then let's also add motion blur. And then let's turn our depth of field back on and see if we can destroy the computer. Oh yeah, it's definitely working. Okay, so now the thing we need to do is we also need to set our focus distance, right? So right now my focal distance is not set correctly, which is why everything's out of focus. So we can kind of use this to our advantage too. Like it could come back here and sit, and we can kind of play around with focus distance to make something interesting. So I'm going to go back into the camera. We're going to click a focus distance keyframe at the beginning, and then we're going to go ahead and get our focus distance dialed in. I'm going to turn draft 3D back on here so that I can move a little bit quicker with this. What is it? There we go. Alright, so I'm just controlling that little plane of focus right there. Then if we turn off Draft 3D, we should see our O's, or the front of our O's, should fall into focus. Oh, that's what I was doing. Let's set that back to 400. There we go. So now we should have pretty sharp focus on the front of our ring. And if we move this across, we should see some nice depth of field happening over here. And we could play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and push U on this so I can see where all my keyframes are at. So I've got focus distance up here. Camera's doing a bunch of funky stuff. I'm going to have the focus distance kind of pull forward here so the Tron kind of goes out of focus. And then as it snaps back to this section, we're going to push the focus distance out so that part of our Tron logo is in focus. You could do something fun too where like, where's the zoom? Alright, so I like, let's make the zoom happen here so it zooms way out as it flies across, and then let's have it zoom back in. Right here, so we kind of just get this crazy detail going on. And then as it moves around again, I'll have it zoom out a bit. Back to center, we'll do another zoom and kind of have it centered up in the center of the text. Alright, and let's just see if we can't render this, play it back, and see what it looks like. Oops. Let's go over here, make this one view, and then we'll go ahead and turn off Draft 3D and play this out. So this is a half resolution render. I'm going to pause this.